Hey YouTube, Alex Conley here, and in today's video I want to give some budget tips on visiting Singapore. And now some of you may be wondering, Singapore, I hear that that's a really expensive destination, and what do you mean by budget? Um, well, you know, I found that in Singapore there were some ways to save money, and some of the ways that I'll be talking about will involve uh, general costs, and then some of them will involve uh, avoiding getting fined, basically. So some of you are probably familiar, if you've read up on Singapore, you're wanting to visit Singapore, that Singapore can be very rule oriented. There's a lot of rules in Singapore that you want to follow. There's a lot of laws that you don't want to break. The fines can be extremely expensive, and so you don't want to get fined, especially if you're on a budget where a fine could really cut down on the amount of time that you're able to travel, or send you home early, or you end up spending all the money on the fine and you don't get to enjoy your trip. So I'll start off on the tips about cutting down expenses, and then I'll get into some of the things about avoiding fines. So first off, I use my Chase points. I save up my Chase points on my Chase credit cards, and I was able to get a room that would normally cost like $50 a night. I think it was on sale for $40 a night due to coronavirus, and I was able to get it for something like 3,500 points a night. So that was a good price. I'm not big on hostels, just my personal preference. But if you're looking at going on a bit more strict budget as far as accommodation, cheaper than that 35 a night price point, then I recommend looking into hostels. There's a variety of hostels in Singapore. I think there are a number of them in Little India neighborhood. There are some in Chinatown, and I don't know the exact number, but I feel like what I saw, many of the hostels are ranging from like 12 to 25 US per night, and so that's going to be cheaper than what I paid. But I felt like the privacy of having my own room and staying in a quieter part of Singapore was worth the trade-off. So I stayed at the K2 guest house, and if you're looking for kind of how that place was, you can check out one of my other videos. It's, I do a tour where I share the room, I share the bathroom, and give kind of a general experience of how that went. Moving beyond that, there's, let's see what we have here. You'll want to look at public transportation. Now, Singapore is not a big country. It's a somewhat small island. I've heard it being described as comparable in size to Manhattan. I saw a lot of the country in the 3 or 4 days I was there, and so look at public transportation. Just like if you were in New York City and you were on a budget, I would say take the subway. Take the look at the buses. You don't need private transportation when you are in Singapore. There's an MRT system. The buses are very convenient. Most everything is in English, so I didn't have any challenges trying to interpret Mandarin. I didn't have to, read any kind of characters. Most everything was in English, and I don't recall a single instance where somebody did not understand English in my time in Singapore. So if you are looking to cut your costs, I mean, their public transit is really affordable and mostly convenient. There are going to be some instances where you're having to transfer that can get kind of confusing. I will say, if you are on your way to the airport and you're in a time crunch, that's when it's worth it to spend on private transportation. I ended up missing my flight due to bus delays and having to spend, I think, another $60 to get to Bangkok from Singapore because I missed my original flight because the bus schedule in Singapore did not line up to what was stated. And then when I got there late, I was stressed and in a hurry and went to the wrong terminal, and et cetera, et cetera. But aside from getting to the airport on time, I think it's a good idea to figure out the transportation system. If you have a SIM card, which you can buy at the airport, you'll be able to use your maps, and it'll, my internet was great the whole time I was there. I didn't have any slowdowns or delays or disconnections. Next, when you're looking at eating food, dining, you're going to probably hear about all of the fine dining establishments in Singapore. You're probably going to hear about some Western food that you can have there in Singapore. But if you're on a budget, I don't recommend these. A friend of mine, he visited Singapore sometime in the last year, and he spent $18. I don't know if that was Singaporean dollars or US dollars equivalent on a hamburger. And that's a lot of money. Now, this wasn't a McDonald's. This was more of a local establishment. But go for the hawker stalls, the hawker centers. You're going to hear about these when you're reading up on Singapore, when you're planning your Singapore trip. They're located throughout the country, and this is where the local people eat. This is where service industry people eat. You'll get meals for a much more affordable price. When I was eating at the hawker centers, I was spending anywhere from like $2 to $4 US dollars equivalent for a meal. And this is much cheaper than when I looked at hamburgers for $15, $20, which is more than what I want to spend on a meal. And so consider the hawker centers. They have great hygiene standards in Singapore. From what I saw, the food tasted really good. There's a big enough variety of options where you're not confused about what you're eating, like some parts of some Asian countries. The street food is just not very, not always so appetizing, not always so clean. But in Singapore, I definitely recommend checking it out. It's a good way to get good value, and you'll definitely find value if you stick to the hawker centers and you're not trying to go out and have fancy dinners, which, if you're on a budget, you probably shouldn't be having fancy dinners too often. Next, alongside avoiding kind of, the fancier dinners and going for the hawker centers, avoid expensive services. Most people don't stay in Singapore that long, since it's not a massive country. I feel like most of the people that I've read, their trip reports, their visit reports, their plans, most people aim to visit Singapore from anywhere from 2 to 7 days. Some people are just there for a single day layover. Keeping that in mind, don't go for expensive services. Don't plan to have, if you're on a budget, don't plan to get your hair cut or a massage in Singapore, because these things are going to cost significantly more than any other area in the region. So if you're looking to get a haircut, you're looking to get a massage, one of these types of things, wait until you get to Malaysia, or wait until you go to Thailand, Cambodia. Any of the other countries in the region are cheaper when it comes to services. Labor costs are relatively high in Singapore, even though they don't have a minimum wage. The relatively high cost of living is priced into services, so you're going to pay a premium when it comes to getting any of these things done. My next tip, if you're there and you're on a budget and you're not looking to do too many expensive activities, I'm sure there are some expensive activities that you can do. Check out the public parks. I believe one of the leaders of Singapore in the past kind of made it a point, saying he wanted it to be a country with plenty of gardens, or a country of gardens. And the gardens are gorgeous in Singapore. Like, everything looks ornate, really clean, really well kept, gorgeous wild sort of plant life. These are located throughout the country. So regardless of where you're staying, you're probably not too far from a really nice public space. And I found them nice enough. Some people might say, oh, going to the parks is boring. I found them really nice and really well kept and really interesting. And I mean, I'm a park person, but I feel like even if I wasn't a park person, that I'd really enjoy visiting some of these spots. So yeah, I definitely recommend some of the public parks, and enjoy them. So, kind of my next point, the locals I found in Singapore were friendly. Definitely ask people for questions, directions, advice, suggestions, tips if you don't know what you're doing or where you're going. I found them to be really helpful in giving me these directions and doing all these things. It's, not all countries are like that, but that's what I found in Singapore. I found people to be, really nice and um, wanting me to have a positive experience in their country. I mean, there were several conversations. I was telling local people, I'm like, I love this country. Like, it's really clean. It's really, people are friendly. The food is really tasty. Everything, most people speak English, so I didn't have any challenges with communicating or translating. I didn't have to pull out my Google Translate all the time. It's a nice place. It really is a nice place, and I think that you can count on, locals on wanting you to have that experience and wanting you to have that feeling. Speaking of the locals, kind of, talking more on the budget mindset and the budgeting, watch what they do. Kind of see how locals are living and doing things, where they're shopping. If you see a long line of what appears to be like local people, of course it's kind of hard because Singapore is pretty diverse. It's kind of hard to tell who's a tourist and who's a local. There are a lot of visitors there because there's a lot of reasons to visit Singapore. But if you see a lot of people in line for something, it's probably worth checking out. Now, some people aren't cool with dealing with lines, but if lines don't bother you, check it out. I remember checking out a sushi takeaway spot in a train station. I'm like, sushi at a train station. Where I'm from in the United States, probably not the best idea, but here in Asia, it's a little bit different story. I saw quite a few people eating there. I tried it. It was great value. It was like equivalent of $3 or $4 for a nice little tray of sushi. Now that made a great lunch at a reasonable price, reasonable by Singapore standards, in my opinion. What else? Go for walks. If you're on a budget in Singapore, you're looking, like I said, not to do all the high-end dining, high-end, spending time at high-end hotels, et cetera, et cetera. Go for walks. I walked a lot when I was in Singapore, and I felt like I saw a lot of really interesting, unique, off the beaten path things that many tourists might not experience. There's a lot of cool architecture and there's a lot of cool cars in Singapore. So even just walking through the neighborhood that my hotel was in, I saw a few different cars. I think one was like an Aston Martin, and some really interesting architecture, like houses that just, I don't know, things you wouldn't really see where I'm from, the United States. And so it's one of those countries, I don't recommend this for all countries or all cities, but Singapore is a place where I feel like you get a lot of bang for your buck when you just go for walks. Now, it is hot. If be careful if during the day that you bring plenty of drinking water, but it's safe enough that you can walk around at night. So even if you're wanting to walk around at night, know that you're probably not going to be a victim of crime, and you're probably going to see a lot of really cool, interesting stuff. Regardless of where in the country that you're walking. So, kind of my last several points before I get into the things that you want to avoid when you're on a budget in Singapore. Of course, everybody should avoid getting fined there, but I think particularly people that are budget travelers want to mitigate that. Don't look at hotels around the Marina Bay. These hotels are basically all really expensive. I think that the Marina Bay Sands Hotel, the famous hotel, while it looks gorgeous, while I'm sure it's a wonderful place to stay, staying there, you're looking at a $300-400 a night bill, and that's to start with. I'm sure that they have many more expensive rooms than that. It costs, I think, $5 billion to construct, and they definitely charge a premium to stay there, and it caters to high-end, wealthy travelers. I'm sure that the food there is very expensive. It's just all around not a very budget-friendly part of Singapore. You're going to pay a premium, even if you don't stay at Marina Bay Sands. If you stay at one of the other hotels in the Marina Bay area, you're going to pay a premium for the views, for the location, for the luxury shopping that's in the area. Access to all these things is expensive. Even if you're not interested in making use of it, these things are going to be really pricey. So you're going to want to look at places elsewhere. I mentioned the hostels in Chinatown and in Little India. I stayed I think it's called the Queenstown area. I can't think of the MRT station name, but I was like a 10-15 minute walk away from one of the MRT stations, and I felt like I got good value there. But that's what I read. That's one of the tips that I read is look away from that area if you're on a budget like I am. So kind of my next tip, don't drink in Singapore. So I know some people when they're traveling, when they're on vacation, they enjoy partaking in drinking. It's a social activity. They like to go out and meet people. They like to try local spirits, check out cool bars, certain bar districts and nightlife scenes. Understand that these are really expensive in Singapore. So just like the restaurants are expensive, just like the services are expensive, from my understanding, alcohol can cost even like $8 to $10 per drink, whether it's beer or a mixed beverage. And this can really add up. And so if you're on a budget, you could spend the equivalent of several meals worth of money just on one drink. And so if you are looking to party and have a nightlife experience, Singapore, but you're on a budget, Singapore may not be the place to do it. You might just put that money aside and wait until you get to a cheaper destination, whether it be Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, other parts of Asia, basically. Singapore is just really not budget friendly toward people that are interested in a lot of nightlife and drinking, partying, and all that. I didn't drink when I was there. I didn't really feel like I missed out. I wanted to take the sights and sounds in, and I tend to not like the sensation of being hungover. I guess nobody does. But I knew that, especially coupled with the heat, that I didn't want to do that. So yeah, if you're on a budget, just put off the drinking till another time, and yeah, your wallet will thank you for it. Last couple of tips. Make it short. So I mentioned before, a lot of people seem to only visit Singapore for 2 to 7 days. I felt like I got plenty in the 4 days I was there. I saw a lot. I took a bus and ended up going the long way to getting to my hotel. It's an island, so it's not a major landmass like the United States. I know Australia is technically an island, but I would call it a major landmass as well. You can keep a visit to Singapore short and see quite a bit and make a note, well, you know what, I enjoyed Singapore, I want to go back. Personally, I do want to go back to Singapore at some point. Make a note of the things that you missed that you want to do when you go back. I saw some of the things I wanted to see, and there's some others that I plan to check out when I return. That's the beauty of kind of a small place. I'd say the same thing about like Manhattan. If you go to Manhattan, you're not going to do everything in Manhattan in 3 to 7 days. You could probably live there for a year and still not quite see everything. So keep it short. Understand that your daily costs in Singapore are going to be pretty high as a visitor. So try to be active. Try to be out and about. Try to enjoy as much as you can during the time that you're there, and make note of what you want to do next time. And my final tip is, before I get into the things that you want to avoid as far as fines go, spending less doesn't mean you had less of a visit. Being a budget visitor there, just because you're not renting a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, just because you're not engaging with some of the higher end activities or eating at fine dining establishments, you still got to see it and you still got to do it. I definitely feel grateful for my time in Singapore. I look forward to coming back. And so why don't we get into the rest of what I was talking about. First off, read up on the laws, rules, and regulations in Singapore. There are quite a few, but they feel like it makes the country a better place. And I don't really feel like it's my place to disagree or to tell other people in this context how they should do things. I feel like their government does what it does for a reason. And so, that being said, I do encourage people to follow their rules, whatever their rules are, whatever country you're in. Follow the rules, follow the laws. You don't want to get in trouble. And so, kind of some of the things, like off the top of my head, that I think are more obvious. Don't eat on public transit. Don't drink on public transit. This is posted, but it's just another reminder here. You don't want to, get on the MRT and crack open a can of Coke or, dig into your sandwich. They see that in other public transit systems, these can be kind of nuisance activities. They can cause messes, they can cause spills, they can disrupt other passengers, and they don't want it on their system. So don't do these things when you are on public transit. Next, don't jaywalk. Jaywalking can lead to car accidents. It can be dangerous. Just don't jaywalk, and you won't get a fine for jaywalking. Next, if you're a tobacco user, don't use that in undesignated areas. If you're unsure, ask around. Maybe hold your pack, show it, and ask if it's appropriate to do there. And kind of moving beyond that, just read up on the rules, the laws, the regulations of Singapore. Check Reddit, check Singapore's website. I guess it's singapore.gov or .sg actually. And you can find out what the things are there. Some Western people are uncomfortable with the idea. If you feel like you can't follow the rules, if you feel like it's going to be too strict for your taste or standard, I recommend maybe passing on Singapore and checking out different countries in the region. While I really enjoyed Singapore, while I think it was a great experience, I wouldn't say it's for everyone. I don't think that everybody is going to enjoy it in the same way. And so, these are kind of my tips for budget travelers to Singapore, whether it be, looking into hostel accommodation, eating at hawker centers, taking public transportation, doing some of the free activities like going for walks. I hope this has been helpful. My name is Alex Conley. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. Subscribe, check out some of my other videos. Like I said, I do a tour of my room at the K2 guest house in Singapore if you want to check that out. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.